Good morning, everybody. How are you today? I'm going to take a minute and just ask the Lord to be present, and if you'd go ahead and pray with me. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in us the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and we shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. So by the sweat of your brow, it's specifically Genesis 3, verse 19. And the full verse is this: by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread until you return to the ground from which you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So most of us men will spend the majority of our lives working at some trade craft to earn a living. That living that we earn will provide us and our families with the things we need for their sustenance. So what is this thing called work? Well, since we're using the Genesis text, by the sweat of your brow, as our jumping point, we need to see where that phrase comes from and take it from that context. And so it's the summation right at the end of the creation account after Adam and Eve's fall. So if you read Genesis 1 and 2, you see the majesty of work as God effected it. And even now we can see the majesty of God's work. All we need to do is look around. So, though to us work may be a negative thing, at the outset of creation it simply was not. It was never intended to be so. And so I decided to take an interesting delve into this four-letter word, work, because I don't know about you, in my trade craft, there are a number of four-letter words that are used, and they're less than savory, and I'm sure you've all had that experience as well. So let's look at some four-letter words that we can associate with the word work. Let's start with that word, as a matter of fact, work. So at the outset of recorded time, God sets forth diligently executing a plan of creation. It's his work. And on the sixth day of that seventh-day plan, he forms mankind in his image and likeness. And at that time, God gives to man the role and responsibility to care for his work product. The creation we live in has been given to us to care for. We get to use it. And we get to ensure that it flourishes along the lines and the direction of the plan that God had started at creation. So it's fair to say that work well done yields beauty, majesty, and wonder. Our work, as assigned by God, is intended to foster and maintain creation. It is intended to be a participation in creation. Our work is given specifically to us to implement God's plan, that plan of majesty and beauty and wonder. And it's given to us to help that created scene grow in its beauty and majesty. The work that God gave us as a gift is a gift of cosmic proportions. Most of us cannot fathom the depth and the breadth of that gift, but that gift has been given to us to manage. And the gift that was given to Adam, Hebrew for man, was thoroughly known by him. He knew what he had been given to tend. He had named it. God brought all the creation to him on that sixth day for him to name. Adam knew what he was to manage, and he had full and total control over it. And so when we look at the wonder of creation, we see that the plan that God is implementing involves great thought, incredible intricacy, sublime beauty, and wonder expressed materially. Adam is the pinnacle of that material expression of God's work. In fact, God's very image. So as to be more closely associated with God, Adam is not left isolated, but rather granted a suitable partner with whom he could become one flesh, so as to be in similar fashion as God is within himself. A relationship. So Adam and Eve set about the task of tending God's handiwork with full authority and full autonomy. And at the end of issuing the everlasting assignment, God sees the fruit of his labor ready to flourish in the trusted hands of a perfectly formed manager. So he takes the time. Really, God takes time to rest. On the seventh of the 7-day period, God rests. And so he sets forth for us a demonstration of the need for his command to rest. 1/7 of that natural tracking period is a rest period. So we see in creation that work is a culmination of a plan formed in the mind of our Creator, which he expresses the love that exists within himself as life. Life, love, time, rest, plan, work. Work is an expression of love that yields life. These were just some of the insights that were given in the essays that I read to prepare for this in the Catholic Gentleman. But as we know, work becomes tainted. Work becomes toil. We know the story of sin. We know the story of misdirection, pride, folly, blaming, yielding. We know that. But are we consummately aware that it's our story too? That's my story, it's your story. We need to be reminded, every man, Jack, and lady that we encounter, everyone is a sinner, is one who would deceive, misdirect, be filled with pride and folly. So it's important to carry that as we progress in our own daily efforts at work. So, though it looked like at the inception of God's plan the world would be an Eden that Adam had been granted, it actually became a place filled with good and not good, evil. Traces of Eden smattered with the traces of hell. Eden, the garden of God's imminent presence, or good, and hell, the absence of God's imminent presence, which is evil. God informs Adam that the implementation of his ideas by way of fulfilling God's plan now, after the evil had been committed, would be fraught with struggles and difficulty. No longer would Adam enjoy rich intimacy with the things and creatures of God, but rather that intimacy was fractured by Adam and Eve's selfishness. And so the exercise of self-will would damage the intimacy that exists between creation and man as intended by God. Selfishness would rule over selflessness. So tending becomes toil. The ease of mutuality is overcome by self-interest. Adam could not clearly see the overall good, but saw his own selfish intentions and needs. Adam could not see how other creatures could contribute to that mutuality. No, he had to go out and find his way over their way, because now, when the manager can no longer see the good in the others, then the others rebelled. So Adam then must exert great effort, great toil, in lieu of work, to bring fruitfulness from the plan that he was duty-bound to manage. Work, the management plan of God, takes on the nature of duty or obligation in lieu of love, the free gift of life. And so, because tainted with sin, becomes toil. But work is still God's plan. The plan hasn't changed. Because work has been tainted does not mean it is not a good. And it still needs to be tended, even though it will be toil. Because work has been shrouded, the vision of love is not always easily seen within its daily expression, but it's still the principal avenue of life. Work is a principal way to life. Work is a plan of God for all created in his image and likeness. Again, the plan hasn't changed. You and I are called to live out and in that plan. Jesus comes to be the manifest fulfillment of the plan and is a worker within the plan. But he is not only the worker, he is the planner. He's the implementer, and he is the purpose of that plan. And so demonstrates to us afresh how we are to live out the plan of God in the course of our work tending creation. Jesus, while in his creaturely form, and I ran a calculation, I assumed that he didn't really start working until he was 5, and that at 30 he began his ministry. So 25 out of his 33 years, he worked with his father to grow in his tradecraft. So 75.8% based on those calculations. I'm not an engineer though. On earth, he worked in his tradecraft under the tutelage of his father. Now, I don't want to speculate whether Jesus found the work he did as a carpenter toil. Somehow I don't think so, but that's a discussion for another time. We can muse on that. But the point of it is, Jesus worked to uphold his Father's plan in the course of his lifetime, demonstrating to us that the work that we do is efficacious and good for bringing life. He was a tradesman. And one of the things that I reflected on as I was looking at that, he was a tradesman at the time that worked with many materials. He worked with wood. He worked with rocks. He worked with dirt. He worked with water. He probably worked with waste matter as well, human and animal. They got into it all. That's what they did back then. So then, let's look at work, the plan, and tradecrafts. In Laborem Exercens, St. John Paul II is critical of the position held in the ancient world that seemingly, and it's making itself present today, I don't know about you, but I do see it, is that manual labor is somehow to be looked down upon. In that same encyclical, our beloved saint reminds us that each human person is gifted as God ordains to serve a specific human community within the context of his plan at a specific time for a specific purpose, and at time, place, and function that an individual brings to God's plan is perfect, because God's plan is perfect. Not always perfectly executed by the managers, but the plan is perfect. I come to do your will, O Lord. I come to do your will. So it occurred to me, because we had some construction work done around the house, and there was a lot of dirt work being done. So it occurred to me that God did a lot of work with dirt. Look at creation. There's a whole heck of a lot of dirt and rock out there. He wasn't afraid to get into the dirt and work with it. He's not afraid to work with rock. He doesn't appear to be afraid to work with anything. I mean, he created those beetles, dung beetles. They work with waste. He's not afraid of that. What's my point? What's my point? My point is, there seems to be this idea that societal value is associated with the ability to earn a salary. The higher the salary, the higher the apparent value of a person. In that analysis, an A-rated movie star has a higher personal value than, say, a ditch digger or an excavator operator. Or, more egregious, a porn star has a greater value than, say, a carpenter, because of their ability to earn a salary, if you believe the idea that salary is the measure of a person's dignity. It's fair to say that the striking examples cause us to rail against that ideology. We know it's not true and it's not supposed to be. But I chose them to point out the fact that we can be guilty of assigning a person's value by their position or their apparent ability to earn. But are you and I guilty of the ever more subtle prejudice? What do we think about a manufacturing line worker versus the manufacturing engineer? What about the line cook to the chef? What about the janitorial staff to the manager? How do we see these people when we walk in a building or when we're walking along the road? What do we think of a bus driver? What about a taxi cab driver? I think you get my drift. Do you and I honor each person and their trade craft where they are and when we encounter them as participants in God's perfect plan? God's plan is working out in the now, and we are to live it in the now to bring life. Life is given to others by honoring God present in them. Many of our interactions with others is in the context of work, and so to bring life, to give love, to be loving, we must honor what their abilities are and what they do. So then, work is now toil. The plan has been seemingly thwarted, but not at all. It isn't as if God didn't know this was going to go on. So then, how then does toil get changed back to work, where work is the tending of God's perfect plan of creation? Well, if you and I are to participate fully, willfully in that plan, then we must act in a way, work, to implement our part of the plan. If Jesus is the restoration and the perfect example of living out the plan of God in the now, then we must yield our actions to his teaching and living out that plan. Jesus speaks often, as I have mentioned, that he came to fulfill the will of the Father. Jesus embraces his duty as a son. He speaks of that often. So work, lived well, involves duty as it relates to our individual station in life. And so duty is a good. Jesus told us that the law is good. And so obedience to the will of the Father is fulfilling the plan that the Trinity has had since creation began. So obedience to the law, our bosses, is a good. Jesus showed us that the Father's plan involves bringing all, especially the poor, to life, because it is loving, the plan. Jesus showed us that the love of the Father is available to all who would receive it. And so richness, participating in God's plan, is life experienced in receiving the love of God and giving out that love. Jesus showed us that contrary to the selfishness that Adam entered into when he walked away from the full expression of the plan, is that self-giving is the highest expression of one human being to another. Excuse me. And so, emulating the love that the Son has for the Father to bring the fullness of life, we must bring love, respect, and honor of others. And in work, the trade craft that I engage in to bring the needs and goods for my family is part of the plan that he envisioned before time began. What you and I do, what the people around us do, has been envisioned before time began. And so that work that we do, that we bring, that we participate in, involves the living out of the giftedness of creation every day for the duration of my life. Doing so doesn't eliminate the moments where work becomes individually forced toil, where it gets tedious. I don't know about you, but hauling rocks around, after about 3 hours, I'm done. I ain't done, but I'm done. I don't want to do that no more, but you do it. You dig deep and you do it. And so, doing so, living out God's plan, willfully choosing to participate in the work that he's given us, is joining together with the Trinity in fulfilling creation. We participate in the creative act of God and continue to effect its majesty and beauty. So then, through all these musings, what do we take away? Well, first, I think we need to see that work, in the light of God's revelation, is a good ordained for man, and it's a good of man. Secondly, work was tainted by sin, and sometimes does bear the shroud of toil. So I have to admit that I'm responsible for my attitude towards work, that I, in fact, don't always see it as a gift. And in those moments, as Jesus did, unto your will I commit my spirit. Likewise, however, I also must see that those with whom I work are sinners too. They will have the same moments. And so in interaction with me, should hopefully see the loving action of a gift giver who chooses himself to yield his will to the Father, to living out that plan, and so give them life. Thirdly, I think we see that work requires the application of prayer. Sin clouds, it shrouds, it hides, it tries to hide the truth. Truth is available for all who ask for it. So encountering the truth comes from those who gave life originally, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Relate with them, relate to them, ask for their guidance. The Trinity have raised up great heroes as well that have lived lives with true affinity towards God's plan, and so we should call on them as well. We have the license to do so. Fourthly, work requires growth in the sources of life, virtue. Seeing through the shroud of sin requires repudiation of our own weaknesses, inspired by acts of our selfish will, not our selfless will. And so developing perseverance and fortitude, virtues which we can cultivate, in living out the duty that God calls us to, intending his plan. And we can work on prudence, justice, courage, and temperance, the 4 cardinal virtues, which leads us to well perform our tradecraft as we have been gifted. And work in the art of love. In your interactions with others, encourage people to live out the fullness of their human dignity. Encourage them to pursue a tradecraft commensurate with their gift. Welder, carpenter, electrician, field service engineer, farmer, equipment operator, philosopher, teacher, engineer, doctor, nurse, all honorable roles and participants within the plan. Work, understanding that you're working for the greatest artisan in time or out of time. Our work is in the plan of God. And from the time of creation, he knows what we do. He knows how well we'll do it. And he knows the effect of what we do will have on others. Have faith that God's plan is perfect. It has been underway since creation and will continue to eternity. Love itself has formed it. Love itself sustains it. Love itself is the end to which we travel. After all, it's all in a day's work. Have a great day, everybody.
Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona